This video covers notes 14.3, solving quadratic equations by factoring, day 1. This part of your notes has already been filled in for you. A quadratic equation is an equation in which the highest exponent is 2, and therefore they have two solutions. Our standard form for a quadratic equation is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So our objective today is to solve quadratic equations by factoring. Those steps are listed below. Set our equation equal to 0, factor completely, solve each factor, set each factor equal to 0, and solve. So problem 1, we've color-coded this for you. They tell us first to set our factors equal to 0. Well, that's already done. And then, if necessary, factor completely. Remember, factor means that we want to take something like problem 2, x squared, blah, 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 and get it into two sets of parentheses. Well, if we already have two sets of parentheses, then we've already factored completely. So steps 1 and 2 are already done for us. Step 3 is in green. They took each factor, 3 and minus 4, and set it equal to 0, and 3 and plus 5 and set that equal to 0. So we set each factor equal to 0 and separate our work. From there, we look on the left side and solve 3n minus 4 equals 0. We solve for n. So we add 4 to both sides, divide by 3, and get that n is 4/3. We take our other factor, which is completely separate, and set that equal to 0 and solve as well. So we subtract 5, divide by 3, and get negative 5/3. Remember that quadratic equations have two solutions, so I should have two letters, n equals, two different sets being solved. So problem 2, first thing we do is make sure it says equals 0. That is done for us. Step 2, we factor. That work has been done for us as well, but it's been written. It wasn't given to us. So remember, in order to factor, we use the box, x squared and a negative 28. We put negative 28 in y equals divided by x, and we solve, finding our two factors. 7 and negative 4 would add to a positive 3. We factor, and this is our factored form, x plus 7, x minus 4 equals 0. So step 2 has been completed. It was not done when we got the problem, but it is done now. The next thing we do is set each factor equal to 0. So I take x plus 7 and set it equal to 0, and x minus 4 and set it equal to 0. From here, I solve both of them separately. So x plus 7 equals 0. I'm solving for x. So I subtract 7 from both sides, and x equals negative 7. My other factor, I solve for x. So I add 4 to both sides, x equals 4. So I have two answers, which makes sense because this is a quadratic. So x minus 7 and x is negative 7 and x is a positive 4. So problem 3, we have to do all our own. We have our steps listed for us, so let's go step by step. The first thing they ask is it set equal to 0? Well, we don't have an equal 0 here. We had it on 1 and 2, but if you don't see equals 0, then you need to make that happen. So I'm going to move 3x squared to the other side, because if they cancel, I now have an equal 0. On the left side, I'm left with 3x squareds, a negative 12x, and a negative 15. Remember that we want to write it in standard form, so x squared x number, in order to make sure that we solve our problem correctly. So we have now set this equal to 0. Our next step is to factor completely. The first thing I notice is that there's a GCF here, so I can take a 3 out of all of my terms. Remember, when you take it out, you divide, so 3 divided by 3 cancels. Negative 12 divided by 3 is negative 4. Negative 15 divided by 3 is negative 5. In order to continue factoring, I will now take what's in parentheses. So x squared and minus 5. I multiply those for my product, which is negative 5x squared. My sum is that middle number, which is negative 4x. So in my calculator, I'm going to make this a little smaller. So in my calculator, in y equals, I put -5 divided by x. Divided by x. And I click second table to look at my graph. Remember, I'm putting the product and searching for the sum. So -1 and +1 and -5, if I want to double check, 1 plus -5 would be -4. So my factors are a +1 and a -5. From here, I factor out my GCFs. So x and 1, x and -5. So I am now done factoring. My factors are x plus 1 and x minus 5. Now, they tell me to set each factor equal to 0. So I take my two factors, anything with an x, and set it equal to 0. I am done setting my factors equal to 0. I now solve. So to solve for x, I move 1 to the other side through the opposite operation. And I solve for x, I move 5 to the other side through the opposite operation. And I have completed all of my steps. So as long as you follow these steps in order, do what they say, factor accurately, you'll be good. So problem 3, set equals 0. We do not have standard form yet, so I'm going to move 6x to the other side. And now I have an equal 0. Next, I need to factor. So these share a 3 and an x. So I factor out the 3x. My 3's cancel. X squared divided by x is x. -6 divided by 3 is -2. My x's cancel. Now, if you notice, what I have in blue is my factor. I've taken out the GCF. I have 3x here and x minus 2 left. If I do not have an x squared term or a w squared or anything squared term, I cannot use the box. The box is only useful if you have a squared term, which means I'm done factoring. So I have my factors, 3x and x minus 2. I set each factor equal to 0. Remember, like I said on problem 3, anything with an x gets factored. So on problem 3, my GCF does not have an x, so I ignore it because I need 2 answers. Here, my GCF has an x, so I have an x here and an x here, so I set both of them equal to 0. And I then solve. So I've set them equal to 0. Now I will solve. So I divide both sides by 3, and x equals 0. I add 2 to both sides, x equals 2. I have solved both. Problem 5 is a word problem. It's kind of confusing, so we started it for you. The area of a rectangular room is given by the equation 2w squared minus 14w equals 36, where w is the width. Find the width. So the first thing we do is set it equal to 0. So we take 36 and we move it to the other side. Anytime you move something, you do the opposite operation. So 36 becomes negative, and I put it over here to start my problem. I then factor completely, so I've divided every term by 2. I put the 2 in front and divide it out. So 2 divided by 2 is just w squared. -14 divided by 2 is -7. Bring down the w. -36 divided by 2 is -18. We then took what was left in parentheses and factored it. So we put it in the box, w squared, -18. My product is -18w squareds. I'm looking for two numbers that add to -7, so -9 and +2. Factor out my GCFs, and this is my factored answer. I will then take each factor, so this is what you need to be writing with me. I take each factor and set it equal to 0. And then solve. So solving for w, I add 9 to both sides, or I subtract 2, depending on which one you're looking at. And these are my two answers. Now, the only problem here is that you cannot have a negative width. I cannot say the room that I'm sitting in right now is 20 feet by negative 15 feet because negative 15 feet doesn't make any sense. So if I have a width of 9 or a width of 2, I can't use, a negative 2. I cannot use the negative 2 because this is not reasonable. You cannot have a negative measurement. So on real world problems and real world problems only, like area of a room, we're talking a real world situation. If you have a negative answer, you have to cross it out because you cannot have a negative width reasonably in the real world.